The morning sun had barely touched the horizon when old Thomas McCarthy stepped out onto his wooden porch, coffee mug in hand. At 62 years old, he had grown accustomed to the peaceful silence of his ranch, the gentle sounds of cattle in the distance, and the crisp mountain air that filled his lungs each morning. But this morning was different. There, curled up against the corner of his porch, was a young woman wrapped in a thin, worn blanket. Pressed tightly against her sides were two small children, a boy who looked about 7 and a girl no older than 4. Their clothes were dusty and torn, their faces pale with exhaustion. Thomas stood frozen for a moment, his coffee growing cold in his hands. He had lived alone on this ranch for nearly 10 years, ever since his wife Margaret had passed away. Visitors were rare, and unexpected ones were even rarer. He quietly set down his mug and knelt beside the sleeping woman. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and even in sleep, worry lines creased her forehead. She couldn't have been more than 30 years old, yet life had clearly dealt her a difficult hand. "Ma'am," Thomas said softly, gently touching her shoulder. The woman's eyes flew open instantly, filled with fear and panic. She pulled her children closer, her body tensing as if preparing to run. "Please," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Please, don't call the police. We'll leave. We just needed to rest for a moment." Thomas held up his weathered hands in a gesture of peace. "Easy now. Nobody's calling anybody. I just want to know if you folks are all right." The woman studied him carefully, searching his face for any sign of threat. Finding none, her shoulders slowly relaxed, though she kept her arms protectively around her children. "I'm Sarah," she finally said. "These are my children, Michael and little Emma. We've been walking for 3 days." "Walking from where?" Sarah's eyes dropped to the ground. "From the city. My husband passed away 6 months ago. He was sick for a long time, and the medical bills took everything we had. When we couldn't pay the rent anymore, the landlord..." She paused, swallowing hard. "We had nowhere else to go. I heard there was work in the next town, so we started walking." Thomas felt his heart tighten in his chest. He looked at the 2 children, now awake and staring at him with wide, uncertain eyes. The little girl clutched a ragged stuffed rabbit that had seen better days. "When was the last time you ate?" Thomas asked. Sarah hesitated. "The children had some bread yesterday morning." "I'm fine." But Thomas could see the truth in her hollow cheeks and trembling hands. She had been giving whatever food they had to her children, sacrificing her own needs for theirs. Without another word, Thomas stood up and extended his hand. "Come inside, all of you. I've got eggs, bacon, and fresh bread. Margaret always said I cooked too much for one person anyway." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Sir, we can't." "Name's Thomas." "Not sir. And you can, and you will." "I won't take no for an answer." That morning, Thomas watched as Sarah and her children ate their first real meal in days. Little Emma giggled for the first time in weeks when Thomas's old dog, Rusty, licked her face. Michael asked endless questions about the horses in the stable, his young eyes lighting up with wonder. As Sarah helped wash the dishes afterward, she turned to Thomas with gratitude overflowing from her eyes. "Thank you for your kindness. We'll be on our way after this. You've already done more than anyone else has." Thomas dried his hands on a towel and looked out the window at his sprawling ranch. 50 acres of land, a dozen cattle, several horses, and a farmhouse with more empty rooms than he could count. He had built this place with dreams of filling it with family, but fate had different plans. "Sarah," he said slowly, "how would you feel about staying on for a while? I'm not as young as I used to be, and this ranch needs more hands than I've got. I can offer you room and board, honest wages, and a safe place for your children to grow." Sarah's coffee cup nearly slipped from her fingers. "Mr. Thomas, I couldn't possibly." "You'd be doing me a favor," Thomas interrupted. "This old place has been too quiet for too long, and those children of yours deserve a chance to be children again." Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she struggled to find words. For months, she had faced nothing but closed doors and cold shoulders. Kindness from strangers had seemed like something from another lifetime. "Why?" she finally managed to ask. "Why would you help us? You don't even know us." Thomas smiled, his eyes growing distant with memory. "When I was a young man, just starting out, I hit a rough patch. Lost my job. Couldn't feed myself. Had nothing but the clothes on my back. A stranger took me in, gave me work, taught me everything I know about ranching. He said, someday I'd have a chance to do the same for someone else." Thomas paused, his voice thick with emotion. "I've been waiting 30 years to pay that kindness forward. I reckon today's the day." Months passed, and the ranch transformed. Sarah proved to be a hard worker, with a natural talent for managing the farm's affairs. Michael learned to ride horses and help with the cattle, growing stronger and more confident each day. Little Emma's laughter became the soundtrack of the farmhouse, her joy infectious and healing. Thomas, who had spent years in lonely silence, found his home filled with life again. He taught the children about the land, about hard work and honesty. Sarah became like the daughter he never had, and the children started calling him Grandpa Tom. One evening, as they all sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Sarah leaned over to Thomas. "You saved our lives that morning," she said softly. Thomas shook his head and smiled. "No, Sarah, you saved mine. I had forgotten what it meant to have a family. You reminded me. Hash, hash. The moral of the story. Kindness costs nothing, but can mean everything. A single act of compassion can transform not only the lives of those who receive it, but also the life of the one who gives it. When we open our hearts and homes to those in need, we often discover that the greatest gift is the one we receive in return: connection, purpose, and love. Never underestimate the power of helping a stranger. The kindness you show today may create ripples that change the world tomorrow. What we do for ourselves dies with us. What we do for others remains forever.